Well, let's talk about where the market is heading. It does look like we talked about this a little bit last week. It does look like we're going to see some drop in interest rates coming pretty quickly here in September when the Fed meets. That will have I think, a kind of a spiral effect in terms of allowing some of the mortgage rates to drop. Although there's no direct correlation between the Fed rates and mortgage rates, they're based on what's called a 10-year T-bill, which is a bond, and it's and that's primarily where the things are. But there's a lot of flexibility in that bond. So the 10-year T-bill, in fact, let's just look it up right now. Let's see what the 10-year T-bill is today, and I'll tell you how that thing works. Since we have no other topics we need to go through. Um, By the way, CNBC is a good place to get a lot of this financial information if you need in your treasury today. So the current price right this minute, and this is runs 24 hours, kind of like Bitcoin, 4.155%. So what the mortgage lenders do is they get their money essentially at that rate right there. And they add between 1 and 3%. Generally, that's the general range. If things are going great and there's a lot of volume in the market, people are buying and selling houses, economy looks strong, they'll add a point to that. So you could, in theory, you could have, and they're not limited to that. They can go below that, they can go above that, but generally it's 1 to 3 percentage points, or what we call 100 to 300 basis points above that number. So from 5.16% up to 7.16. The last couple of years, though, because the economy has been flat and in some cases it's gone up in certain areas, but more importantly, there's been high inflation until recently. They've added the full 3%. In fact, excuse me, I've even seen some 3.5% stuff. You get into jumbo mortgages or anything non-conventional, and they'll add 4% to that number. So, if you want to get a jumbo loan, something like over $1 million or something in that range, it's going to cost you 8%. And that's even with 10% down. So it's all based on that. And what we need to see is that 10-year drop. Well, why does it drop? It drops generally when the economy is doing good, but more importantly, it drops when the Fed drops their rate, because there's almost a competitive advantage here. The Fed basically funds banks, and the T-bills essentially fund the government. So the Treasury Department is the crux of this whole thing anyway. They print bills ad nauseum. There's no backup. That's a whole other story. But they're providing these kind of funds both ways. And um, when the Fed tends to drop its interest rates, you're going to see those T-bills will drop because people will rush to the T-bill as an investment, and they'll abandon a dropping price or dropping interest rate on overnight funds and things like that. And so, that will in turn then give you better rates on homes for mortgages. We haven't seen this thing happen in a long time. In fact, let's see. The last time we're at a relatively, I would say, average price for since last October. There's been probably as much time above that number as there is below, maybe even a little bit more above that than below. But we're in a little bit of a downward trend. And so if we see the Fed come in aggressively here in September and drop interest rates more than 25 basis points, like they drop them 50 basis points, you're going to see this 10-year T-bill drop below 4%, in my opinion, probably 3.7, 3.6, maybe even something like that, 3.5. Which and then you'll also have more confidence in the market. And so whereas now they're adding 3 points on top, or 300 basis points on top of the 4.16%, they may only add 2. So you could instantly go from a 7.1% interest to probably a 5.6 or something like that. It's a big drop. you'll see a lot of buyers come off the sidelines, and you'll see a lot of sellers put up for sale by owner signs, because in a lot of cases these sellers have cheaper rates that they got a few years ago when stuff was at 3, 4, 5%, and they probably figure, okay, I'll take my gain on the house and I'll go get a new house, and even though it's going to cost 5.6% versus my 4% mortgage, it's okay because I made all this money on the house. So you'll see the market pick back up pretty dramatically. I don't think it's going to happen in one fell swoop. I don't think it's going to happen in September that way. I think they're going to put their toe into the water, test the temperatures, and they'll probably drop 25 basis points. Sometime between now and the end of the year, though, whether it's the October, November, December meeting, one of those, they're going to have to do more than a 25 basis point drop, because right now the market has priced in, and everybody is kind of in agreement that that 4.15% 10-year T-bill is overpriced by about 1.5%, or in other words, 150 basis points. And more importantly, the overnight funds the Federal Reserve has, excuse me, are overpriced by that same amount. And so to catch up, remember, these guys were late to the party and they didn't do enough, and they haven't done enough. And so at some point, they're going to have to do a catch up. And you may see 50 basis points thing. They may find maybe they're looking for an event. Excuse me, this is bad. We got fires here, so I'm getting bad allergies. But you may see some type of crisis happen, maybe some war. Maybe Russia, totally invades Ukraine or something. They'll use that as an excuse to catch up, and you'll see a big drop by the Federal Reserve. It won't be between meetings; it'll probably be at the next meeting, but that'll be their justification. This happened right after 9/11. They used it as a justification. They dropped, and it happened again after 2008 Great Recession. Through probably 13 or 14, where it was just drop, and stuff was cheap. And then COVID hit, and we had the same thing. And so they're waiting for, in my opinion, they're waiting for an event. They're waiting for something extraordinary to happen, because in my personal opinion, these guys are a bunch of chicken shits, and they don't have the cojones to stand up and do what they need to do at the time they need to do it. That's what the consensus is across the board. And once again, you'll see Trump's putting pressure on them because they are artificially keeping that interest rate too high, and they want to hide behind events rather than do their job. So they wait for an event to happen, and then they use that as a reason. And nobody pays attention at that point, because we're more concerned about COVID or the jets that hit the Twin Towers or something else. And so they're hiding behind these things. So as I think Hillary Clinton said, you never let a good crisis go to waste. And these guys are probably the epitome of that. They wait for a good crisis, and then they drop their prices to where they should be. So there is a tremendous pressure on them to drop interest rates. No matter what, by next year, you've got a certain number of these guys that have termed out. They have I think it's a 14-year term. Jay Powell, I can guarantee you he will not have that job after April of next year when his term ends. He will not be renewed. And a lot of these people are either going to be fired or they're going to be termed out. And they're going to get some people who are more in line with Bessent, our Treasury Secretary, and what the reality is as to what's going on out in the marketplace. So that's all good stuff in terms of what's going to help us here in the housing industry, because we're being artificially kept up too high price wise right now. It could be significantly less than it is, and it should be. But for years, the housing industry was sacrosanct. In other words, it was probably the most protected industry by the government. And the last 4 years, until recently, it has just been like, we don't care, let it sink, let it flounder, that type of thing. And that's actually what's happened. It didn't need to. It was just mismanagement and the allowing of the mismanagement to continue on. It's not going to happen under this sheriff. It's a different game now. So anyway, that's how that thing's going to work. That's what I expect to see at this next meeting, and hopefully that'll be good news for everybody.